Well, good evening, Utah Westerners. I'm pleased to be brought to you in this electronic way by Hunter and Richard Hale. Thank you, both of you, for making this possible. Well, I think it's our fifth annual July movie, and this is really a great one. Why? Because it's filmed in Utah and made to look like it's upstate New York. And Utah has done that so well over the past 100 years. And that's one of the reasons why I selected it. It's also the first Technicolor movie, feature movie, filmed in the state of Utah in 1939. But I may be preaching to the choir here because most of us are at the age who would realize this. But with movies like this, from the 1930s and 40s. This is before television. The only other entertainment medium you had was radio. No phones, no cable, no streaming. And so motion pictures like this were a big deal. Why? In terms of the late 1930s, we were coming out of the Great Depression. And motion picture theaters were the one communal stop place where people could hear and see from the screen stories, myths with a capital M, if you will, about America and where we were at that time. And forget for the moment, as you watch tonight's movie, yes, it's about the colonial era, the upstate Mohawk Valley, and the Revolutionary War. But who is this movie made for? It's made for the people in the United States in the 1930s. It's telling stories that have a contemporary moral or theme to it. And that's important. The other important thing is movies during this time, up to 500 a year, were enjoyed by people 3 times a week. In a country of 130 million people, from 80 million to 90 million were going to the movie theaters every week, sometimes 2 and 3 times a week. So they were hearing stories coming from the screen that related to them. Drums Along the Mohawk was an important motion picture for 20th Century Fox. One way that you can know that is when you see above the title, a Darryl F. Zanuck production. He was one of the most powerful movie moguls in Hollywood, and his studio, 20th Century Fox, turned out an average of 50 features a year. That's almost one a week. And the name Darryl F. Zanuck only appeared on about a dozen of those because that signified that he personally produced, meaning he oversaw the production of that motion picture. Drums Along the Mohawk was one of them. So you have a lot of background material in the program notes, and hopefully you've had an opportunity to read those, and you can even review them after you see the movie. But I want to go over some of the experiences that I had when I was doing research for my book, When Hollywood Came to Utah. I tried to seek out as many of the filming locations of the movies that I dealt with in that book as I could. And I had a particularly entertaining time roaming the countryside above Cedar City on Cedar Mountain in the Dixie National Forest because I was really curious, where in the heck did they film this movie that was supposed to look like upstate New York, the Mohawk Valley? So I armed myself with still photographs shot on location in 1939. And so, armed with information from local newspapers, I searched out the area, which was principally in a place called Sydney Valley, on top of Cedar Mountain, near Cedar Breaks and Duck Creek Village. And with my photos in hand, I wanted to see where the fort had been built. And yes, it was a real fort with logs and stone, as you see in this photograph. It was a substantial facility. So I drove on a dirt road in Sydney Valley with photographs, and I would line up the ridge line of the hills that you see in back of the fort to see where it would match up. And after an hour or so, I finally saw before my eyes a ridgeline that matched the ridgeline in the contemporary photographic stills shot on location while they were making the movie. And I looked down into this pasture where cattle were roaming, and I seemed to still see an imprint in the bottom part of this little valley, the pasture, of where a huge structure might have been. This was about 2008, and I was thrilled that I had finally found it. So I wondered, because of the use of Technicolor cameras, which were from 300 to 500 pounds, it's economical when making movies to not have to move all that equipment, plus the power-generated Klieg lights and reflectors, dressing rooms, everything else. You don't want to move it too far. So as I looked for the location of where Claudette Colbert and Henry Fonda had their pioneer farm, I figured it couldn't be too far from this location. And as I drove around short distance from where the fort was built, voila, I came upon the area that you see in this photograph. As they're working in the field and you see their farmhouse in the background, I could see it right there, undisturbed after all these years, because even now this land on top of Cedar Mountain is pretty much as it was then, with few structures, which is unlike Duck Creek Village that is now full of vacation homes up there. So I started looking around for other locations, principally those locations where Henry Fonda's run from the Indians in the movie is so dramatic. And I've got a couple of those images to show you about that. And that's a famous part of the film, as he outruns the Indians who were coming after him to kill him. He's going back to the fort to get reinforcements to help them during the Indian attack on the fort. And Fonda said during the production that as they were shooting other scenes and would have a break, John Ford would tell him, okay, get into your outfit for the run. We have another place that we want to shoot. Or the sun is just right, or the sunset is just right. So suit up and we'll get a few shots of that. So the wonderful, exhausting looking run he makes through the movie was shot many different times, many different shots, and strung together, including the dramatic sunset shots. And then as he's trying to hop his way on stones across Aspen Mirror Lake, which has been used for a lot of movies. And they just had a great time shooting up in Sydney Valley. And the Technicolor is gorgeous. And one of the reasons that John Ford was so attracted to the location in the first place was there's no haze, there's no fog in the sky. You get these dramatic, beautiful blue skies in Technicolor. So I had fun tracking down these locations. And if you ever want to, you can visit them yourself, right on top of Cedar Mountain in the Dixie National Forest. And one could even film the same movie today and use the same locations. So I'm glad you're here. I hope you will enjoy this classic 1939 movie that was one of the best films of the year, a year that was highly populated by so many of the movies that we now consider classic movies. Enjoy.